I arrived at the restaurant, ready to meet my wife, Clara, only to be greeted by a stranger who sat down across from me and said, "Hello, cuckold. Your wife doesn't belong to you anymore. Here are the divorce papers. Sign them if you want to stay alive." The rain outside was pouring relentlessly, its rhythm tapping against the windows like an eerie countdown. I sat there, staring out of the car window, the city's neon lights flickering in the distance, their reflections turning the wet streets into a watercolor painting. My heart was racing, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. I couldn't recall the last time I had felt this nervous. I was about to meet Clara for dinner. After weeks of silence, weeks of avoiding each other, we had finally agreed to sit down and talk. I kept telling myself I was ready for whatever she had to say, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. There was a heaviness in the air tonight, like something was suffocating me with anticipation. Clara had changed. I'd noticed the little things, the way her smile seemed forced, the way her gaze often lingered somewhere beyond me, the constant lateness when she came home. Her phone was always glued to her side. She had always been the center of my world, but now she felt like a stranger. I walked into the upscale restaurant, greeted by the soft hum of conversation, the clink of silverware, and the warm scent of freshly baked bread. The hostess led me to a private table by the window. Clara was already there, dressed in a chic black dress, her hair perfectly styled. She looked beautiful, just like I remembered, but there was something distant in her eyes, as if she was already somewhere else. I sat down across from her, offering a weak smile. "Clara," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "it's good to see you." She returned the smile, but it was strained, almost rehearsed. "You too, Max." For a moment, neither of us said anything. I wanted to ask her what was going on, but I didn't know how. Everything felt wrong. And then, before I could find the right words, a man I didn't recognize walked up to the table and sat down across from me, without saying a word. He was tall, blonde, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth and power. There was something unsettling about him, like a cold wind blowing through a room that had once been warm. Clara didn't even flinch. She didn't say a word to stop him. The man looked directly at me, and his lips curled into a smirk. "Hello, cuckold," he said, his voice low and mocking. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My throat tightened. What did he just say? Clara's eyes flickered to the man, then back to me, but she didn't speak. She just sat there, her lips pressed tightly together. The stranger didn't wait for a response. Instead, he slid an envelope across the table toward me. Its contents clearly weighed down the paper. "Your wife doesn't belong to you anymore," he said. "She's mine now." He paused, his smirk widening. "Here are the divorce papers. Sign them, and maybe you'll get out of here alive." I froze, my mind racing. This couldn't be real, but the way he spoke, the confident, almost predatory tone, told me it wasn't a joke. This man, whoever he was serious. Clara's eyes met mine briefly, and in that split second, I saw something that made my blood run cold, guilt. But it was a fleeting moment, as if she realized she'd been caught but quickly masked it. It was too late for that now. I glanced down at the envelope, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to yell, to scream, to throw everything in the air, but something in the back of my mind told me to stay calm, to stay in control. But the truth was staring me in the face. My wife was no longer mine. She had already given herself to this stranger, this man who was now demanding that I sign my life away. The man's name was Adrian, a name that would soon become synonymous with my downfall. He had a confident air about him, as though the world owed him everything. He was a high-profile businessman, and even though I had never met him before, it was clear that he had more than just money. He had power. He had influence. And from the look on his face, he had Clara. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. "Clara, what is this? Who is he?" I whispered, but my voice cracked under the weight of the question. Clara's gaze dropped to her lap. "Max, I didn't want you to find out like this," she murmured, almost as if apologizing. But there was no emotion behind her words. "But I've been seeing Adrian for months now. I'm sorry." The words felt like a punch to the stomach. My wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had been with another man this entire time. The betrayal was so deep, so consuming, that I couldn't even process it. The anger, the hurt, the confusion. It all boiled inside me, threatening to spill over. Adrian leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the table. "It's not about love, Max," he said, his tone chillingly calm, as if this were all just a transaction. "Your wife and I are partners in ways you'll never understand. The sooner you sign those papers, the better it will be for you." His tone sent a shiver down my spine, but something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let this happen. Not like this, not without a fight. I stared at the divorce papers, my mind racing. If I signed, I would be giving up everything. My wealth, my reputation, my family, my life. But the alternative, the consequences of refusing, were unknown, and something in Adrian's eyes told me he wasn't someone to take lightly. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the true face of betrayal. Clara's eyes, once filled with love, were now cold and distant. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing everything I had ever built. I looked up at Adrian, and a thought crossed my mind. Maybe, just maybe, there was another way out of this. Maybe I didn't have to sign the papers. Maybe I could turn this around, somehow, but the more I thought about it, the more the tension in the air suffocated me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, racing with the adrenaline that had built up over the past few minutes. As I made my decision, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The seconds stretched out into what felt like an eternity. The air around me grew heavier, thick with the weight of the situation. It was as if the entire world had shifted, leaving me stranded in this unfamiliar place, the paper in front of me becoming the symbol of my life unraveling in real time. Each word on the page felt like a final decree. You are nothing. You no longer matter. I forced my eyes up to Clara's face, searching for something, anything that would give me hope. I needed her to tell me this was all a mistake, a misunderstanding, something that could still be fixed. But instead, she avoided my gaze. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her napkin, and her lips were pressed into a tight, unreadable line. "Clara," I whispered, but the word felt foreign on my tongue, like I was speaking to a stranger. "How long? How long have you been seeing him?" She hesitated, and for a split second, her eyes darted briefly to Adrian, as if seeking his approval before answering. Then, she let out a shaky sigh, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "For almost a year, Max. A year. A year of lies. A year of deceit." The air left my lungs in a rush, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Adrian leaned forward, his smile never wavering. "You heard her, Max. It's been long enough. There's no coming back from this." He slid the divorce papers closer to me. The sharp edges of the envelope dug into the table, almost like the papers themselves were extensions of his threat. "Sign, or we'll have other ways of convincing you." The implication was clear, and the pit of dread inside me deepened. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. This was something far darker, something that reached beyond the pages in front of me. I wanted to scream, to stand up and throw the table over, but something inside me told me to stay composed. If I gave in to the anger, I'd lose control, and in this situation, losing control meant losing everything. I took a deep breath, my fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly that my knuckles went white. "What do you want from me, Adrian? Money? Power? What is this really about?" Adrian's grin stretched wider, and his eyes glinted like a predator savoring its prey. "I don't want anything from you, Max. Not anymore. This isn't about money. This is about loyalty. Clara's loyalty. And you, my friend, never had it." He turned to Clara, his gaze softening just slightly. "She chose me, and now she's a part of something bigger. A better life. You were just a stepping stone." Clara's face turned pale, her lips trembling, but she didn't protest. She didn't defend me. And in that moment, the realization hit me harder than any punch ever could. I was nothing to her now. I wasn't even a shadow of the man she had once loved. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the papers in front of me. My mind raced, the anger bubbling beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. But I couldn't afford to make rash decisions. I had to think. I had to outsmart them. Adrian was calm, too calm. He knew he had the upper hand. He knew Clara had already made her choice, and he knew that I was at the mercy of this twisted situation. But what he didn't know was that I had something he didn't: time. I leaned back in my chair, eyes locked on his, trying to steady my breathing. What happens if I don't sign? I asked quietly, my voice low, barely above a whisper. Adrian's smirk faltered for a moment, just a brief flicker of hesitation before it returned. Then you get nothing. Nothing but the humiliation of being left alone, abandoned by everyone who matters. And if you're unlucky, we might not let you walk away at all. His words were chilling, but they didn't scare me. They only fueled something inside me, something cold, calculating. I couldn't fight him directly, not yet, but there were other ways. Clara's eyes were now fixed on the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She couldn't even look at me anymore. It felt as though she was a ghost, someone who had once been mine but was now lost to me forever. But I couldn't focus on her anymore. This wasn't about her. This was about survival. Fine, I said, my voice steady. I'll sign the papers, but I need one thing. Adrian's eyebrows arched, intrigued. And what would that be? I want a meeting with your lawyer, I said, my words cutting through the tension. I want to make sure the terms are clear, that this is legally binding, and that I don't lose everything on a technicality. Adrian paused for a moment, clearly weighing the request. You want to talk to my lawyer? His voice was tinged with disbelief. Why would I let you do that? Because you're not as clever as you think you are, I said, my words slow and deliberate. And you'll want to make sure the deal is airtight, won't you? You don't want any loose ends, not when someone like me might be able to find them. The silence stretched, the tension palpable. For a moment, I thought Adrian might refuse, but then his smirk returned, this time with a hint of admiration. You're more resilient than I thought, Max. Fine. I'll arrange it, but don't think you can outsmart me. I always get what I want. As Adrian stood to leave, I felt a sense of determination well up inside me. I wasn't defeated yet, and I wasn't going to sign anything until I had a plan. Later that night, after Adrian and Clara had left, I sat alone in my apartment, the divorce papers still in front of me. I knew I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't walk away like Adrian thought I would. I had to get my revenge, but it had to be on my terms. There was only one person I could trust, my old friend Luca. Luca had worked in corporate law for years and owed me a favor. I called him, and within minutes, he was on his way over. Max, what the hell happened? He asked as he stepped inside, his face a mask of concern. I never thought I'd see you like this. It's a long story, I said, my voice hoarse, but I need your help. I'm going to make sure Adrian doesn't walk away with everything. Luca looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll help you, but this needs to be careful. We're playing a dangerous game here. I'm not afraid, I replied, my eyes steely. This isn't about fear. This is about making them pay for what they've done. Luca's face hardened with determination, his eyes sharp as we pored over the divorce papers under the dim light of my living room. This isn't just about revenge, Max. If we do this, we're stepping into a game where the stakes are much higher. We need to be smart. I nodded, absorbing his words. Luca was right. Revenge wasn't enough anymore. I had to be meticulous. Adrian had already shown how ruthless he could be, and Clara, well, she was a lost cause. This was no longer just about hurting them. It was about regaining control of my life. Luca flicked through the papers with expertise, scanning for something, anything, that could give us leverage. His finger landed on a specific clause. Here, he said, pointing. This clause here states that all assets acquired during the marriage are to be split equally unless otherwise specified by both parties in writing. He paused, then pointed to another section. But this, he said, his finger tracing another part of the document, states that in cases of infidelity, the wrong party can request a revised division of assets. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. So, if Clara's been cheating, I could fight back legally? Exactly, Luca replied. But here's the catch. We need proof, solid proof. Otherwise, We'll never stand a chance in court. I sat back, my mind racing. I can get that, I said slowly, the pieces falling into place. But we have to make sure Adrian doesn't realize what we're up to. Luca nodded. It'll be delicate, but it's doable. You'll need to make Adrian think you've given up. Play the role of the defeated husband. Once he's comfortable, that's when we strike. The plan was set. I would act weak, compliant. I would sign the papers but delay the process, appearing to accept the divorce on Adrian's terms. All the while, I would gather evidence, phone records, surveillance, anything that could expose Adrian's own dirty dealings. I'd have my revenge, but it would come with precision. The following weeks were a delicate dance. Adrian was arrogant, sure, but his arrogance made him predictable. He assumed that once I signed the papers, I'd be out of his life. He didn't see the storm brewing underneath my calm facade. I spent my days in a haze of fake indifference. Clara stayed away, her silence more damning than any words she could have said. The apartment, once filled with the sound of our laughter, now felt hollow. I could almost hear the echoes of my past life, the one before Adrian had slithered his way into it. But every night, I became someone else. I was methodical. I hired a private investigator, someone I knew through an old friend. She had connections, resources, and a sharp eye for details that most people would overlook. It didn't take long for her to uncover Clara's hidden texts, her late-night rendezvous with Adrian, and the elaborate lies they had both spun. The documents were irrefutable: phone logs, pictures, timestamps, receipts. I had it all. And now, Adrian would have no choice but to face the consequences. The meeting was scheduled under the guise of finalizing the divorce. Adrian, always confident, believed he had one. He had everything: the woman, the life, the power. But he had no idea how close he was to losing it all. I walked into the restaurant that afternoon, my heart pounding in my chest, but my face was a mask of composure. Clara was already sitting at a corner table, her eyes scanning the room nervously. I could see the guilt in her posture, the way she kept glancing at the door, waiting for something or someone. Adrian wasn't there yet. I waited. I had a plan, and this was the last step. When he finally entered, his smug expression faltered just slightly as he caught sight of me, but only for a moment. He was too used to being in control. "Max," he said, his voice cool, though I could sense a subtle weariness beneath his words. "I take it you're ready to sign the final documents?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked past him to Clara. "You know, it's funny," I began, my voice steady as I stared at Clara, her eyes darting away from mine, guilt painting her every movement. I began, my voice low, "How easily you both think you've won." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" His tone was sharp, demanding, but I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folder. I slid it across the table toward him. Adrian's eyes flicked down to it, and for the first time, I saw the smallest hint of unease in his expression. His gaze moved between the folder and my face, but I remained still. "Take a look," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You'll find everything you need in there. Proof of your little affair, your scheme, your lies." Adrian's hand trembled slightly as he opened the folder. His face grew pale as he scanned the documents, the photos, the texts, his eyes darting between the papers and my face. The realization hit him. It was too late. The game had changed. Clara looked from the folder to me, her face paling as she realized the trap I had set. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had no defense left. "You have two choices," I said, my voice cold, cutting through the silence like a knife. "You can either take these documents to the authorities and face the consequences of your actions, or you can walk away from everything you've built, because I will make sure you both pay for what you've done." Adrian's face was a mask of rage, but I could see the fear behind his eyes. He knew I had him, and for the first time, he wasn't in control. The fallout was swift and brutal. Adrian tried to use his influence to fight back, but it wasn't enough. I had already gone public with everything. His affair, his underhanded tactics, the lies. The truth was unstoppable. Within days, Clara had distanced herself from him, her shame too heavy to carry. She had lost her chance at everything she thought she wanted. Adrian, meanwhile, found himself caught in a web of legal battles, public humiliation, and the slow unraveling of his empire. No one would trust him again. But for me, the victory was bittersweet. I had exposed their lies, but it wasn't the satisfaction I thought it would be. In the end, all I wanted was the life we had before Clara and Adrian tore it apart. The divorce papers were signed, but I walked away from the deal with something far more valuable: my dignity. A year passed, and things were different now. I had rebuilt my life, slowly, piece by piece. The scars of betrayal were still there, but they no longer controlled me. I had learned that revenge, no matter how sweet, is not the end. It's just another chapter. I'm still not sure what happened to Clara. Last I heard, she was living quietly, trying to rebuild her life in the shadow of her own guilt. As for Adrian, he's a ghost now. The man who once commanded rooms now wanders in the dark corners of the business world. A cautionary tale for anyone who dares to cross him. As for me, I've learned this. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply to live a life they can never touch. And I finally learned to embrace that. True strength is not in the ability to destroy, but in the ability to rebuild yourself after everything falls apart. What would you do if your spouse betrayed you with someone you trusted? How far would you go to expose the truth and take back control of your life? Is revenge ever truly satisfying? Or does it just leave you yearning for the life that was lost? And when rebuilding your life after betrayal, can you ever truly leave the scars behind? Or do they always shape your future? Let's discuss the choices, the pain, and the lessons learned from a betrayal that shattered a marriage and rebuilt a man.